Hello listeners, before we dive into tonight's chilling tale, I want to know, how was your day? What time is it where you are in the world right now? Are you settling in for the night, or perhaps starting your morning with something a little dark? Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here with us. If you enjoy stories like this one, please consider subscribing to Sleep Theories. We bring you the most haunting, mysterious and spine-tingling tales to accompany your quiet hours. Now, let's begin with a story that will make you question everything you think you know about trust, survival, and the secrets buried beneath frozen ground. From the archives of the Ural Mountains Research Institute, recovered materials case file number 2019-047. Voice recording transcript, device serial number MT4419, date of recovery, March 15th, 2019. Location, Dyatlov Pass. Northern Urals. Condition, partially frozen. Audio distorted. Entry 1. February 8th, 2009. Static wind noise in background. Testing. Okay, this thing seems to be working despite the cold. My name is Leah Arman, and I'm a freelance journalist currently in Yekaterinburg, Russia. If you're listening to this, it means something has happened to me and someone found my recorder. I hope that's not the case, but given where I'm going, I want to document everything. I've been obsessed with the Dyatlov Pass incident for 3 years now. 9 experienced hikers, dead in the most inexplicable circumstances. February 1959. They cut their way out of their tent from the inside, fled barefoot into sub-zero temperatures, and died scattered across the mountainside. Some had crushing injuries that would require the force of a car crash. Others showed signs of radiation exposure. One was missing her tongue and eyes. The official Soviet investigation concluded it was an unknown compelling force. 60 years later, we still don't know what happened. Every theory sounds insane. Secret weapons testing, infrasound phenomena, indigenous spirits, even extraterrestrial encounters. But I'm not interested in speculation anymore. I want facts. I've made contact with a local guide named Alexei Morozov. He claims to be related to one of the original rescue team members from 1959. More importantly, he knows the terrain, and is willing to take me to the exact site where the tent was found. We leave tomorrow morning. The temperature is dropping to minus 30 degrees Celsius. I've triple-checked my equipment, but I can't shake this feeling that I'm walking into something I don't understand. The locals here won't even say the name Dyatlov Pass out loud. They call it Kholat Shakhl, the Mountain of the Dead in the Mansi language. I keep thinking about something one of the investigators wrote in 1959. The tent was cut from the inside, as if they were trying to escape something that terrified them more than the deadly cold outside. What could be more terrifying than freezing to death? Recording ends. Entry 2, February 9th, 2009. Sound of vehicle engine wind. Day 1 with Alexei. He picked me up at dawn in an old Soviet military truck that looks like it survived the Second World War. The man himself is unsettling. Not in an obvious way. He's probably in his 70s, with the kind of weathered face you see on mountain climbers and Arctic explorers, piercing blue eyes that seem to look right through you. But there's something else. He moves with this strange, almost supernatural grace for someone his age, and he barely seems affected by the cold at all. We've been driving for 6 hours through increasingly desolate terrain. The last village we passed was 3 hours ago. Alexei doesn't talk much, but when he does, his English is surprisingly good. He told me he learned it from American researchers who came through in the 1990s. Many people come looking for answers, he said. Most leave with more questions. I asked him about his connection to the original rescue team, and his response was oddly specific. My uncle Mikhail was among the first to find the bodies. He never spoke of what he saw, not until the day he died. Then he told me things that were not in the official reports. I'm recording this while we're stopped for fuel. Alexei is outside, and I swear I can see him through the windshield having a conversation with someone, but there's no one there. Just empty road and snow-covered trees stretching to the horizon. The radio died about an hour ago. Static and interference. Alexei says it's normal in the mountains, but the static sounds almost rhythmic, like whispers or chanting. We should reach base camp by nightfall, I'm excited and terrified in equal measure. Recording ends. Entry 3, February 10th, 2009, wind howling, tent flapping. Something's wrong. I don't know how to explain it, but something is fundamentally wrong with this place. We set up camp yesterday evening about 2 kilometers from the actual Dyatlov site. Alexei insisted we approach gradually, to show respect to the mountain. As the sun set, the temperature plummeted, but more than that, the entire atmosphere changed. The wind carries sounds that don't make sense. Voices, laughter, sometimes what sounds like crying. I asked Alexei about it and he just nodded. The mountain remembers, he said. It holds on to the last moments. Last night I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in the snow outside our tent. Multiple sets of footsteps walking in a circle around our campsite. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent flap, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no disturbance in the snow at all. But Alexei was awake too. I could see him sitting up in his sleeping bag, perfectly still, listening. When I asked if he heard the footsteps, he said, "They're just checking on us. We're visitors in their domain." This morning, I found something that made my blood freeze. Carved into a tree trunk about 50 meters from our tent were symbols. Mansi shamanic markings, according to my research. But the cuts were fresh. The sap was still bleeding from the wood. When I showed Alexei, his reaction was unsettling. He studied the symbols for a long time, tracing them with his finger, then looked at me with something that might have been pity. "These aren't Mansi," he said quietly. "These are much older. We're heading to the actual site in an hour. The weather is getting worse, and I'm starting to understand why the original Dyatlov group might have felt compelled to flee their tent. There's a wrongness here that goes deeper than cold or isolation. It's like the mountain itself is alive and watching." Recording ends with distorted sounds, possible voices in the static. Entry 4, February 11th, 2009. Audio heavily distorted, requires noise filtering. Found it. Found the exact spot where their tent was pitched. Alexei brought me right to it, navigating through the blizzard like he'd walked this path 1,000 times. Standing here, looking at this barren slope, I finally understand the true horror of what happened in 1959. There's nowhere to run, no shelter, no protection from the elements. If you left your tent here in a panic, you would die. There's no question about it, which means whatever drove them out was worse than certain death. I've been studying the photographs from the original investigation, and I keep coming back to one detail that never made sense. The tent was cut from the inside with clean, deliberate slashes. Not torn or ripped in panic, but cut with surgical precision, as if someone very carefully planned their exit. But here's what's really bothering me. I found something in the snow. About 20 meters from where the tent was located, buried under decades of accumulation, I found a metal object. It's a camera casing, old Soviet make, the kind that would have been used in 1959. I've spent hours carefully warming it up, and incredibly, there's still film inside. Alexei has been unusually quiet since I made the discovery. He keeps looking at the camera with an expression I can't read. When I asked him about it, he said, "Some things are better left buried. But I'm a journalist. I can't leave things buried. We're heading back to base camp now. The storm is getting worse, and Alexei wants to get to shelter before dark. He's moving differently now, more urgently, like he's afraid of something. For the first time since we started this journey, he seems genuinely affected by the cold. I'm going to develop this film tonight. Whatever's on it, it might finally answer the question that's haunted investigators for 50 years. What really happened to the Dyatlov group? Recording interrupted by severe static. Entry 5, February 12th, 2009. Voice shaking, background sounds unclear. The film. Jesus Christ, the film! I developed it using the portable darkroom kit I brought, and what I found doesn't make sense. It can't make sense. There are 12 photographs on the roll. The first 11 are exactly what you'd expect. Group shots of the Dyatlov hikers, landscape photos, normal expedition documentation. But there's something wrong with the group shots. According to every historical record, there were 9 people in the Dyatlov group. But in these photos, I count 10. There's an extra person in every group shot. A man standing slightly apart from the others, always partially obscured by shadows, or turned away from the camera. But in the final photograph, he's facing the camera directly. It's Alexei, 50 years younger but unmistakably Alexei. I confronted him about it an hour ago. He denied it at first, claimed it was just a resemblance, maybe a distant relative. But his denials felt hollow, and there was something in his eyes, recognition, and maybe relief. Sometimes the mountain demands witnesses, he finally said. Sometimes it demands more. That's when I noticed something else about the photographs. The backgrounds are wrong. The landscape doesn't match the historical records of where the Dyatlov group was camping. These photos were taken somewhere else entirely, somewhere deeper in the mountains in a location I don't recognise. Alexei won't talk to me now. He's been sitting outside in the snow for 2 hours, having an animated conversation with someone I can't see. Every time I try to approach, he waves me away. I've been reviewing my recordings from the past few days, and I'm starting to notice something disturbing. There are voices in the background of every recording. Faint, distorted, but definitely there. Voices speaking in what sounds like Russian, but also something else. Something older. And they're not just random sounds, they're responding to what I'm saying, having conversations with me that I wasn't aware of at the time. I'm scared. For the first time in my life, I'm genuinely terrified. But I can't leave now. I'm too close to the truth. Recording ends abruptly. Entry 6. February 13th, 2009. Audio quality poor, significant background interference. I found his journal, buried under a rock cairn about 100 metres from our campsite, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from the elements. The leather cover is worn but intact, and the pages are filled with Cyrillic writing in faded ink. The name on the first page is Alexei Morozov. The date is January 15th, 1959. He was there. He was with the Dyatlov group. But not as a guide or an innocent participant. According to his own journal entries, he was working for the Soviet military, tasked with leading the group to a specific location in the mountains for what he calls an experiment in human endurance and psychological pressure. But something went wrong, horribly wrong. I've been using my translation app to work through the entries, and what I'm reading is the account of a man descending into madness, or maybe ascending into something else entirely. January 28th, 1959. The subjects are responding to the influences as predicted: sleep deprivation, auditory hallucinations, paranoid ideation. But something unexpected is happening. The mountain itself seems to be responding to their fear. February 1st, 1959. Contact with base camp lost. Equipment failures cannot be explained by weather conditions. The subjects are becoming aware that they are being observed. Zenaida asked me directly if I was reporting their conversations. I maintained cover, but doubt is spreading. February 2nd, 1959. They know. Somehow they know. But it doesn't matter now. The presence beneath the mountain has awakened. It's been waiting for decades, maybe centuries, for the right offering. 9 souls, terrified and helpless, far from any help. The final entry is dated February 2nd, 1959, the night they died. They trusted me. They followed me into the darkness because they believed I would keep them safe, but I was never meant to save them. I was meant to deliver them. The mountain demanded a sacrifice, and in return it offered me immortality. Not life exactly, but continuation. I will become its guardian, its voice, its lure for future offerings. I cut the tent myself while they slept. When they woke to find themselves exposed to the killing cold, they looked to me for salvation. Instead, I led them deeper into the mountain's embrace. One by one, they succumbed to the cold, to the pressure, to the presence that dwells beneath the stone. I am the last witness to their final moments, and I will carry their terror with me forever. It is my burden and my purpose. When others come seeking answers, I will be here to guide them to the same truth. The journal entry ends with a crude map marking locations throughout the Ural Mountains. Each location is marked with a number and a date. There are 17 locations marked, spanning from 1959 to 2007. Alexei has been doing this for 50 years. guiding researchers, journalists, curiosity seekers to their deaths. And I'm number 18. Sound of footsteps approaching. He's coming back to the tent. I can see his silhouette through the fabric, standing motionless about 20 metres away. He's been there for 10 minutes, just watching. I have to get out of here, I have to... Recording cuts out. Entry 7, February 14th, 2009. Audio extremely distorted, requires significant filtering. Whispered, barely audible. Can't run. Storm trapped us in cave. Alexei brought me here. Said it was for shelter. But I know better now. This is where he brought them. Where he brought all of them. The walls are covered in symbols. The same ones I found carved in the trees, but older, deeper, worn smooth by decades of touch. And there are artifacts scattered around the cave floor. Personal belongings, cameras, journals, pieces of clothing, all from different time periods. A hiking boot from the 1970s, a digital camera from the 2000s, a journal written in what looks like German, another in English, all of them telling the same story. A guide named Alexei Morozov leading them into the mountains, promising answers, delivering death. He's been sitting at the cave entrance for hours, calmly tending a small fire. When I found the artifacts, when I confronted him with the evidence of his crimes, he didn't deny it. He actually smiled. "You understand now," he said. "That's good. Understanding makes the transition easier." I asked him what he meant by transition, and his answer chilled me more than the Arctic wind. The mountain doesn't just take lives, Leah. It transforms them. All of those people you found evidence of, they're not gone. They're part of something larger now, part of the presence that dwells beneath the stone, and soon you will be too. I asked him why. Why does he do this? What does he get out of leading innocent people to their deaths? Survival, he said simply. Every few years the mountain demands feeding. If I provide it with what it needs, it allows me to continue. I've been its servant for 60 years, and I will be its servant for 60 more. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that I'm starting to understand him. Sitting here in this cave, surrounded by the remnants of his victims, I can feel something stirring beneath the stone. A presence, ancient and hungry, that views human consciousness as nothing more than food. And it's calling to me, whispering in a language I don't recognize but somehow understand, promising me the same deal it made with Alexei, survival in exchange for service. The temperature is dropping. My hands are going numb. I can barely operate the recorder, but I have to keep documenting. Someone needs to know the truth. Alexei is singing now, a low rhythmic chant in what sounds like the Mansi language. But the words are older than that, older than any human language. They're the sounds the mountain itself makes when it's feeding. Chanting becomes audible in background. I can see shapes moving in the darkness beyond the firelight. Human shapes, but wrong somehow. Moving in ways that don't match the laws of physics. They're the others, the ones who came before me, transformed by their experience into something that's no longer quite human. They're reaching for me. Recording quality deteriorates significantly. Entry 8, February 15th, 2009. Final entry, audio barely intelligible. Sobbing, panic. They're taking me deeper. Alexei and the others. Into tunnels that don't exist on any map. Carved into living rock by something that was never human. I can hear them now. All of them. The Dyatlov group, the other researchers, decades of victims, all speaking in unison. They're welcoming me. Telling me that the fear will pass, that the pain is temporary, that what comes after is beautiful. But I don't want to be beautiful. I want to be human. I want to go home. The presence is showing me things. Visions of the mountain's history, stretching back thousands of years. Indigenous peoples who knew better than to climb certain peaks, who left offerings at the base to appease what dwells beneath. Soviet researchers who stumbled onto something they couldn't understand or control. Modern adventurers who thought they could conquer any challenge. All of them feeding the same hunger. All of them becoming part of the same collective consciousness that spans the entire mountain range. Alexei is talking to me, but his voice sounds different now. Older, deeper, like multiple voices speaking in harmony. Don't fight it, Leah. Fighting only makes it more painful. Accept the gift the mountain is offering you. become part of something greater than yourself. But I can't. I won't. Even if it kills me, I won't become what he's become. The tunnel is opening into a vast chamber. I can see lights in the distance, not electric lights, but something organic, bioluminescent. The walls are moving, pulsing like a heartbeat. And in the centre of the chamber, something massive and ancient is stirring. This is where it all leads. This is what the mountain has been building toward for decades. Not just my death, but my transformation into another guardian, another lure for future victims. I'm dropping the recorder. If anyone finds this, if my body is ever recovered, please know that I tried to expose the truth. Don't trust the guides. Don't trust the locals who offer to help you explore the mountain. And whatever you do, don't go looking for answers to the Dyatlov Pass incident. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Some truths are too dangerous to know. Sounds of struggle, then silence. Recording ends. Official report. Ural Mountains search and rescue date. March 15th, 2019. Reporting officer, Captain Dmitry Volkov. At approximately 14:30 hours, our team recovered the body of an unidentified female from a crevasse near Dyatlov Pass. The victim appears to have been deceased for several years, with the body preserved by extreme cold conditions. Personal effects recovered include a digital voice recorder, partially frozen but intact, a professional camera, damaged, and documentation identifying the victim as Leah Arman, American journalist, last known to be in the region in February 2009. The voice recorder contained multiple entries documenting what appears to be a research expedition into the 1959 Dyatlov Pass incident. The final entries suggest the victim was accompanied by a local guide named Alexei Morozov. However, our investigation has found no record of any individual by that name operating as a guide in this region. Of particular note, the final photograph on the victim's camera shows a single figure standing at what appears to be the summit of Ototen Mountain. The image quality is poor due to equipment damage, but the figure appears to be an elderly male smiling directly at the camera. The photograph was taken with the camera's timestamp indicating February 15th, 2009, the same date as the victim's final voice recording. No other bodies or evidence of additional expedition members were recovered. This case has been forwarded to the Federal Security Service for further investigation due to potential connections to historical incidents in the region. The victim's remains have been transferred to the regional morgue pending identification of next of kin. Personal note, Captain Volkov. I've been leading search and rescue operations in these mountains for 23 years, and I've never encountered anything like this case. The victim's voice recordings, while obviously the product of extreme stress and hypothermia-induced hallucinations, contain details about the 1959 incident that are not available in any public records. More troubling is the fact that several other disappearances in this region over the past decade match the pattern described in the recordings. Solo researchers or small groups, always accompanied by local guides who subsequently vanish without a trace. I've submitted a recommendation that the Dyatlov Pass area be designated as restricted territory, accessible only to authorised scientific expeditions with proper safety protocols. Some places are meant to remain undisturbed. Final note, added March 20th, 2019. 3 days after filing this report, I received a call at my home from someone claiming to be Alexei Morozov. The caller spoke with a slight accent and indicated he had information about the Arman case. When I asked him to come to the station for an interview, he laughed and said, "I'm always available for those who seek the truth about the mountain, Captain. Perhaps you would like to see for yourself what happened to Ms. Arman." I hung up the phone, but the incident has been logged with the FSB. I will not be returning to the Dyatlov Pass region. Addendum, personal journal entry, name, redacted date, March 25th, 2019. Found among the personal effects of Captain Dmitry Volkov following his disappearance. Captain Volkov was last seen leaving his home on March 24th, 2019, telling his wife he was going to get answers. I can't stop thinking about the Arman case. Her recordings, her descriptions of the guide, the way she documented her own descent into terror. It's all too detailed, too consistent to be dismissed as hypothermia-induced delusion. I've been researching historical records of disappearances in the Ural Mountains, going back decades. The pattern is always the same. Researchers or adventurers seeking answers about the 1959 incident, guided by locals who seem to know the terrain intimately, then vanishing without a trace. But here's what's keeping me awake at night. I found a photograph in the regional archives, taken in 1973 during a geological survey. It shows the survey team with their guide, an elderly man identified in the records as Alexei Morozov. The man in the photograph is identical to the figure in Leah Arman's final camera shot. Not similar, identical. Down to the facial features, the expression, even the clothing. Alexei Morozov hasn't aged a day in 46 years. I know how this sounds. I know what people will think if I report this officially. But I also know what I saw in those photographs, what I heard in those recordings. Tomorrow I'm going to drive to the coordinates where we found Arman's body. I'm going alone, and I'm not telling anyone where I'm going. If there's something up there, some truth that's been hidden for 60 years, I need to see it for myself. If I don't come back, if someone finds this journal, know that I went willingly. Know that some questions demand answers, even if those answers destroy us. The mountain is calling, and I can't ignore it anymore. The journal of Captain Dmitry Volkov ends here. His body was never recovered. The Dyatlov Pass region remains open to guided expeditions, and local tourism boards continue to promote it as a destination for adventure travellers seeking to explore one of Russia's greatest unsolved mysteries. Alexei Morozov is still listed as an active guide in the regional tourism database. His contact information remains current, and he receives regular bookings from international visitors interested in retracing the steps of the 1959 expedition. According to recent reviews, he's highly knowledgeable about the area and excellent at helping visitors understand what really happened to the Dyatlov group. He comes highly recommended. Final document, email chain date, November the 3rd, 2024. Between Dr. Sarah Chen, Arctic Research Institute, and info@uralmountaintours.ru. From Dr. Sarah Chen S.Chen at arcticresearch.org to info@uralmountaintours.ru. Subject: Dyatlov Pass Research Expedition, December 2024. Hello, I'm writing to inquire about guided tours to the Dyatlov Pass site. I'm a researcher with the Arctic Research Institute, and I'm planning a documentary project on the 1959 incident. I need someone with extensive knowledge of the area and the historical details of the case. Several colleagues have recommended your services, particularly praising a guide named Alexei Morozov. Is he available for a winter expedition in December? I understand the conditions will be challenging, but I'm an experienced mountaineer, and this research is extremely important to me. I'm particularly interested in visiting the exact coordinates where the tent was found, and I'd like to spend several days in the area conducting interviews and gathering footage. Cost is not a concern. I have full funding from my institute. Please let me know about availability and rates. Best regards, Dr. Sarah Chen. From info@uralmountaintours.ru to Dr. Sarah Chen S.Chen at arcticresearch.org. Subject: Dyatlov Pass Research Expedition, December 2024. Dear Dr. Chen, thank you for your inquiry. We are pleased to inform you that Alexei Morozov is indeed available for your December expedition. He is our most experienced guide for the Dyatlov Pass region and has extensive knowledge of the 1959 incident that you will find invaluable for your research. Mr. Morozov has been guiding expeditions to this area for many decades and has worked with numerous researchers, journalists and documentary filmmakers. He takes great pride in helping visitors understand the true history of what happened at Kholat Shakhl. The winter conditions in December are particularly challenging, but Mr. Morozov is well equipped to ensure your safety, while providing you with the authentic experience you're seeking. He knows the terrain better than anyone and can take you to locations that other guides cannot access. We can arrange for a full-week expedition departing December 15th. The cost will be 85,000 rubles, which includes all equipment, provisions, and Mr. Morozov's expert guidance. Payment can be made upon arrival in Yekaterinburg. Mr. Morozov is very excited to meet you and share his knowledge of the mountain. He asked me to tell you that he has some artifacts and photographs from the original incident that he believes will be of great interest to your research. Please confirm your booking at your earliest convenience. Best regards, Ural Mountain Tours. From Dr. Sarah Chen s.chen@arcticresearch.org to info@uralmountaintours.ru. Subject: RE. Dyatlov Pass Research Expedition, December 2024. Perfect. Please confirm my booking for December 15th. I'm very excited to meet Mr. Morozov and see his collection of artifacts. This sounds like exactly what I need for my documentary. I'll arrive in Yekaterinburg on December 14th and will be staying at the Hotel Maris Park. Please have Mr. Morozov contact me there. One quick question. I noticed in my research that there have been several disappearances in the area over the years. Are there any special safety protocols I should be aware of? Looking forward to this adventure, Dr. Sarah Chen. From info@uralmountaintours.ru to Dr. Sarah Chen s.chen@arcticresearch.org. Subject: Dyatlov Pass Research Expedition, December 2024. Dr. Chen, your booking is confirmed. Mr. Morozov will meet you at your hotel on December 14th at 7 p.m. to discuss the expedition details and review your equipment. Regarding your question about disappearances, you need not worry. These incidents typically involve inexperienced hikers who venture into the mountains without proper guidance. With Mr. Morozov as your guide, you will be completely safe. He has never lost a client in all his years of service. The mountain can be dangerous for those who don't understand its nature, but Mr. Morozov has a special relationship with the terrain. He knows exactly where to go and how to keep visitors safe from any unusual phenomena that might occur in the region. We look forward to providing you with the answers you seek. Ural Mountain Tours. Final entry. Personal note. Found on Dr. Sarah Chen's desk. Arctic Research Institute. Date: December 13th, 2024. Note: Dr. Chen departed for Russia as scheduled on December 13th, 2024. She has not returned. Her expedition was due to conclude on December 22nd, 2024. As of January 15th, 2025, she is listed as missing. Tomorrow I leave for Russia. I've been working on this Dyatlov Pass documentary for 2 years, and I finally feel like I'm on the verge of a breakthrough. The emails from the tour company have been incredibly encouraging. This Alexei Morozov sounds like exactly the kind of knowledgeable local guide I need. I've been reading everything I can find about the case, including some recently declassified Soviet documents that suggest there was more to the incident than the official reports indicated. There are references to psychological experiments and unknown phenomena that were deliberately omitted from the public record. What's particularly interesting is that I've found several references to guides and locals who claim to have inside knowledge about what really happened. Always the same pattern. Researchers and journalists going into the mountains with these knowledgeable guides, then emerging with incredible stories about the true nature of the incident. Some of them have written books, others have given interviews, a few have made documentaries. But what strikes me is how consistent their accounts are, despite being separated by decades. They all describe the same sense of an ancient presence in the mountains, the same feeling of being watched, the same conviction that the Dyatlov group encountered something that defied rational explanation. I'm skeptical by nature. I'm a scientist, not a believer in the supernatural. But I'm also open to the possibility that there are phenomena in remote places like the Ural Mountains that we don't yet understand. Infrasound, electromagnetic anomalies, psychological effects of extreme isolation. There could be natural explanations for the supernatural experiences that visitors report. That's what I'm hoping to document. Not ghost stories or conspiracy theories, but a scientific examination of what might actually be happening in that region to create such consistent reports of unusual phenomena. My equipment is packed, my flights are booked, and I'm more excited about this project than anything I've worked on in years. If I can crack the mystery of Dyatlov Pass, not with wild theories, but with solid research and documentation, it could be the breakthrough that defines my career. I have a good feeling about this Alexei Morozov, someone who's been guiding expeditions in that area for decades, who has artifacts and photographs from the original incident, who knows the terrain better than anyone. He's exactly what I need to get to the truth. I'll start recording everything from the moment I meet him. If there's a story to be told about what really happened in 1959, I'm going to tell it. The mountain is calling and I'm ready to answer. Addendum. Security footage, transcript Hotel Marines Park, Yekaterinburg. Date, December 14th, 2024, 1903. CCTV footage shows Dr. Sarah Chen in the hotel lobby, checking her watch. At 19:05, an elderly man enters the frame. He appears to be in his 70s, wearing traditional Russian winter clothing. His face is clearly visible, weathered features, piercing blue eyes, moving with unusual grace for his apparent age. The man approaches Dr. Chen and they shake hands. Audio is not available, but their body language suggests a friendly professional interaction. Dr. Chen appears excited and animated, gesturing as she speaks. The man, presumably Alexei Morozov, nods frequently and occasionally smiles. At 1912, they move toward the hotel exit together. This is the last confirmed sighting of Dr. Sarah Chen. Final note, Hotel Security Chief Yuri Petrov. I've reviewed this footage dozens of times since Dr. Chen was reported missing. Something about the guide bothers me, though I can't put my finger on what. Maybe it's the way he moves, or the expression on his face when he thinks no one is looking. But here's what really troubles me. I've been working security in this hotel for 15 years, and I've seen this man before. Multiple times, actually. Always in December or January. Always meeting with foreign researchers or journalists who are planning expeditions to the Dyatlov Pass region. I decided to check our records going back to when the hotel first installed security cameras in 2003. The same man appears in footage from 2008, 2012, 2016, 2019, and now 2023-2024. He hasn't aged a day in 21 years. I've reported this to the authorities, but they seem more interested in standard missing person protocols than investigating what I consider to be highly unusual circumstances. They keep telling me that mountain guides in this region often have similar appearances due to the harsh living conditions, that I'm probably seeing different people who happen to look alike. But I know what I saw. It's the same man, meeting with the same type of clients, for the same purpose, across more than 2 decades, and none of those clients have ever returned to our hotel after their expeditions. I'm submitting this report to the Federal Security Service, along with copies of all relevant footage. Someone needs to investigate this pattern before more people disappear. The guide is still active. According to the Ural Mountain Tours website, Alexei Morozov is available for bookings through the upcoming winter season. His bio describes him as the most experienced guide in the region, with an unparalleled knowledge of the Dyatlov Pass area and its history. 5-star rating, excellent reviews, highly recommended. The mountain is still hungry, and Alexei is still feeding it. What you're about to hear comes from a classified journal discovered in 1996, 3 years after its author's mysterious death. The journal belonged to Lieutenant Commander Mason Hale, US Navy intelligence officer. What follows is his first-hand account of Operation High Jump and the truth they tried to bury beneath the ice. US Navy Intelligence Division. Classification: Eyes only. Destroyed. Date range: August 1946 to March 1947. Entry 1, August 15th, 1946. USS Pine Island, Norfolk Naval Base. My name is Lieutenant Commander Mason Hale, and if you're reading this, then I'm likely dead and someone has found what I was never supposed to write down. I'm documenting this because the truth has a way of surfacing, even when buried under miles of ice and decades of silence. 3 days ago, I received orders that would change everything I thought I knew about our world. I was to report immediately to Admiral Richard Byrd for a classified briefing regarding Operation High Jump, what the papers are calling the largest Antarctic expedition in history. 13 ships, 4,700 personnel, aircraft carriers, and enough firepower to invade a small country. For a research mission, it seemed remarkably well armed. The briefing room was cold, sterile, and filled with men whose faces I didn't recognize, but whose bearing screamed intelligence community. Admiral Byrd stood at the head of the table, his weathered face grave as he spread aerial photographs across the polished surface. "Gentlemen," Byrd began, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken knowledge, What I'm about to tell you does not leave this room. Officially, Operation High Jump is a training exercise designed to test personnel and equipment in extreme cold weather conditions. Unofficially, ... He paused, studying each of us in turn. We're going to Antarctica to determine if we're alone down there. The photographs showed vast expanses of white, but there were anomalies, dark spots that didn't match the terrain, geometric patterns that looked almost artificial. One image showed what appeared to be a metallic object partially buried in snow, its surface reflecting sunlight in a way that seemed wrong, unnatural. These were taken during reconnaissance flights in late 1945, Bird continued. The Brazilian Navy reported similar sightings off their Antarctic claims, disc-shaped objects moving at impossible speeds, emerging from and disappearing into the ice. We also have reports of unusual magnetic readings and radio interference in specific grid coordinates. A colonel I didn't recognise leaned forward. "Sir, are we talking about the Germans? Everyone knows they had interests in that region." Bird's expression darkened. "That's what we need to find out. What we do know is that in 1939, Nazi Germany launched an expedition to Queen Maud Land and claimed a territory they called Neuschwabenland. They dropped thousands of metal markers with swastikas marking their claim. The expedition lasted months longer than necessary for simple territorial marking." He pulled out another photograph, this one showing a massive ice formation, with what looked like an entrance carved into its face. This was photographed 6 months ago. Notice the regularity of the opening. Nature doesn't carve perfect rectangles into glaciers, gentlemen. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Admiral, what exactly are we expecting to encounter down there?" Bird locked eyes with me, and I saw something I'd never seen in a superior officer before. Uncertainty mixed with fear. We weren't going down there to explore, Commander Hale. We were going to see who was already there. Entry 2, September 3rd, 1946. At sea, South Atlantic. The journey south has been uneventful, but the tension among the crew is palpable. Word travels fast on a ship, and despite the classification levels, rumours spread like wildfire. The men know this isn't a standard research mission. You don't bring destroyers and aircraft carriers to study penguin migration patterns. I've been assigned to the intelligence unit aboard the Pine Island, working directly under Admiral Bird's command. My job is to analyse any findings, compile reports, and maintain communication with Washington. What they didn't tell me is that I'd also be documenting evidence of what might be the most significant discovery in human history, or the most dangerous cover-up. Last night, I had a private conversation with Admiral Byrd on deck. The Southern Cross was brilliant overhead, and the sea was unusually calm. He seemed different away from the briefing rooms and official protocols, more human, more vulnerable. "Commander," he said, lighting his pipe against the wind, "I've been to both poles. I've seen things that don't make it into the official reports. Strange lights in the sky, radio signals from coordinates that should be empty ice, magnetic anomalies that our equipment can't explain." He took a long draw from his pipe. "But this is different. This time, we have evidence." "Evidence of what, sir?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark water. 20 years ago, I would have said Germans, secret bases, advanced technology they developed during the war. But the war's been over for a year, and the activity has increased, not decreased. Whatever's down there, it's not abandoned Nazi facilities. Then what? "I don't know, Commander, but I have a feeling we're about to find out." He turned to face me, and in the moonlight his eyes looked haunted. "Keep detailed records of everything we encounter. Everything. Promise me that." I promised, not knowing then how heavy that promise would become. Entry 3, October 12th, 1946. Little America 4. Base, Ross Ice Shelf. We've established our primary base on the Ross Ice Shelf using Admiral Byrd's previous expedition site as a foundation. The scale of this operation is staggering. We have enough supplies and personnel to sustain operations for 8 months, yet we're supposedly here for only 4. The official timeline doesn't match the resources deployed. Strange incidents have begun almost immediately. 2 days after establishing base camp, Our radio operators picked up transmissions on frequencies that shouldn't exist. Highly sophisticated encrypted communications using technology more advanced than anything in our arsenal. The signals originate from grid coordinates deep within Queen Maud land, the area the Germans claimed as Neuschwabenland. Lieutenant Peterson, our chief radio operator, brought me the recordings yesterday. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he handed me the transcripts. "Sir, I've been doing radio work for 15 years. I've never heard encryption like this. It's not just coded, it's using a completely different transmission methodology. And sir, some of it's in German, but not standard German. It's using technical terminology I've never encountered." I listened to the recordings. Most were indecipherable, but occasionally words broke through clearly. One word appeared repeatedly. Base 211. According to our intelligence files, there were rumours during the war that Germany had established a secret base in Antarctica, designated as Base 211. But it was dismissed as propaganda. Apparently we were wrong. Admiral Byrd ordered increased aerial reconnaissance over Queen Maud land. What our pilots reported back changed everything. Entry 4, October 18th, 1946. Emergency Intelligence Brief. At 0800 hours, Lieutenant Commander Johnson returned from a routine reconnaissance flight over Queen Maud land with a report that sent shockwaves through our command structure. I'm documenting this immediately while the details are fresh, though I suspect this entry will never see official records. Johnson's voice was steady during the debrief, but I could see the disbelief in his eyes. At approximately 0630, while conducting photographic reconnaissance at 15,000 feet, we observed multiple metallic objects emerging from the ice sheet approximately 200 miles inland from the coast. Admiral Byrd leaned forward. "Describe these objects, Commander." "Disc-shaped, sir. Approximately 50 to 75 feet in diameter based on comparison with surrounding terrain features. They moved unlike any aircraft I've ever seen. No visible propulsion system, no exhaust trails, and they accelerated from stationary to what I estimate was over 1,000 miles per hour in seconds." The briefing room fell silent. Johnson continued, "They appeared to emerge directly from the ice, sir. Not from surface installations, but from beneath the ice sheet itself. We counted 7 objects before they disappeared into low cloud cover." Admiral Byrd studied the photographs Johnson had taken. Even in black and white, the objects were clearly artificial, clearly not of any design in our current arsenal. The surface appeared seamless, almost mirror-like, reflecting the Antarctic landscape with unnatural clarity. "Did they acknowledge your presence, Commander?" Johnson's expression darkened. "Yes, sir. They maintained formation and appeared to pace our aircraft for approximately 3 minutes before accelerating away. It felt like they were studying us, sir." That evening, Admiral Byrd called me into his private quarters. The photographs were spread across his desk, along with intelligence reports I hadn't seen before. Some dated back to 1943, describing similar sightings by German U-boat crews in Antarctic waters. "Commander Hale," he said without preamble, "tomorrow we're implementing Project Silent Spear. It's a classified reconnaissance operation targeting the coordinates where these objects were observed. I want you to accompany the strike team as intelligence liaison." "Strike team, sir?" I thought this was reconnaissance. Byrd's expression was grim. "We're going in armed, Commander. Whatever's down there has technology decades ahead of ours, and they're watching us. We need to know their capabilities and intentions before they decide we're a threat." I should have realised then that we weren't the hunters in this scenario. We were about to become the hunted. Entry 5, October 20th, 1946. Grid coordinates 71 degrees south, 10 degrees west. Queen Maud land. What happened today will haunt me for the rest of my life. I'm writing this by flashlight in the emergency shelter, my hands still shaking from what I witnessed. 3 men are dead, 2 helicopters destroyed, and we barely escaped with evidence that will never see the light of day. Project Silent Spear launched at 0500 hours. Our strike team consisted of 2 helicopters, 12 Marines, and enough firepower to level a small building. The target was a glacial canyon approximately 300 miles inland. where aerial reconnaissance had identified what appeared to be artificial structures beneath the ice. The flight took 2 hours through increasingly unstable weather. Radio communications became erratic as we approached the target coordinates, filled with interference that sounded almost like whispers in unknown languages. Lieutenant Morrison, our pilot, reported multiple instrument malfunctions as we flew deeper into Queen Maud Land. At 07:15 hours, we crested a ridge and saw our target. The canyon stretched for miles, its walls perfectly vertical as if carved by machine rather than formed by natural processes. At the canyon floor, approximately 500 feet below us, structures emerged from the ice, geometric, metallic, and clearly artificial. They followed architectural principles I'd never seen, with surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. But it wasn't the structures that stopped our hearts, it was what was emerging from them. 3 disc-shaped objects, each approximately 100 feet in diameter, rose silently from concealed openings in the ice. They moved with impossible grace, defying everything I knew about aerodynamics and physics. The surface of each craft was mirror smooth, reflecting our helicopters with perfect clarity. "Command, this is Silent Spear 1, Morrison radioed back to base. "We have visual confirmation of artificial structures and 3 unidentified aircraft, requesting immediate backup." The response came through heavy static. "Silent Spear 1, proceed with reconnaissance. Document everything." That's when everything went wrong. The lead disc accelerated toward us with terrifying speed. I expected weapons fire, explosions, some form of conventional attack. Instead, a brilliant white beam emanated from the craft's underside, washing over our helicopter in blinding light. Every electrical system failed instantly. Radio, navigation, engine controls, everything died. Morrison fought to maintain control as we began auto-rotating toward the canyon floor, but the helicopter responded like a dead weight. "Mayday! Mayday! We're going down!" Through the chaos, I watched the second helicopter suffer the same fate. The beam hit them, their rotors stopped, and they plummeted into the canyon. I never heard them crash over the sound of our own emergency landing. We hit hard but level, the helicopter's skids digging deep furrows in the snow. Morrison was unconscious, blood streaming from a head wound. Sergeant Williams and 2 Marines were alert but shaken. I grabbed our emergency radio and camera equipment, knowing we might have only minutes before whatever was in those discs decided our fate. That's when I saw one of them up close. The disc settled silently onto the ice approximately 50 yards from our crash site. No landing gear extended, no engines wound down. It simply stopped moving and hovered 3 feet above the ground. The surface was seamless, like polished mercury, and covered in symbols I'd never seen before. Not German, not any human language I could recognize. The symbols seemed to shift and flow across the surface as I watched, hypnotic and alien. A section of the craft's underside iris opened, not like a door, but like a living membrane. No one emerged, but I felt a presence studying us, evaluating us. The silence was absolute except for the wind across the ice and Morrison's laboured breathing. I raised my camera and managed 3 photographs before Sergeant Williams grabbed my arm. "Sir, we need to move, now." He was right. Whatever intelligence was inside that craft, it had allowed us to survive the crash. That suggested either mercy or curiosity, but I didn't want to test which one would run out first. We improvised a stretcher for Morrison and began moving toward the canyon rim. The discs followed at a distance, maintaining formation like shepherds guiding sheep. They made no threatening moves, but their presence was a constant reminder that we existed at their sufferance. It took 6 hours to reach the canyon rim where emergency crews were waiting. During the entire climb, the discs maintained their escort. Only when we reached safety did they accelerate away, disappearing into the Antarctic sky at speeds that made our best jets look like children's toys. Admiral Byrd was waiting at the rescue site, his face grim as we loaded Morrison into a medical helicopter. As the rescue team worked, he pulled me aside. "What did you see down there, Commander?" I told him everything. The structures, the technology, the way the craft moved and responded. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Did they communicate with you? Any attempt at contact? No, sir, but... I hesitated, unsure how to express what I'd felt. They weren't hostile, Admiral. They could have killed us easily, but they didn't. It felt more like a warning. Bird nodded slowly. A warning. Yes, I think you're right. He looked back toward the canyon, now hidden by distance and weather. The question is, what are they warning us about? Entry 6, October 25th, 1946. USS Pine Island Emergency Conference. The past 5 days have been a whirlwind of classified briefings, encrypted communications with Washington, and increasingly desperate attempts to understand what we've encountered. The photographs I took in the canyon have been analysed by our best intelligence officers, and their conclusions are both fascinating and terrifying. The symbols on the craft's surface don't match any known human language or writing system. Linguistic analysis suggests they're not decorative but functional, possibly some form of advanced interface or communication system. The metallic composition appears to be an alloy unknown to our current metallurgy, with properties that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of material science. More disturbing are the intelligence reports that have been flooding in since our encounter. Similar sightings have been reported by naval vessels throughout the Southern Ocean. A destroyer reported contact with a high-speed object that paced them for 30 minutes before disappearing beneath the ice. A submarine crew described sonar contacts moving at speeds impossible for any known underwater vessel. But the most significant development came yesterday when Admiral Byrd received a direct communication from Washington. I wasn't present for the initial briefing, but Byrd's demeanour afterward told me everything I needed to know. We were no longer conducting reconnaissance. We were being recalled. "Commander Hale," Byrd said, calling me into his quarters last night. "I need you to understand something. What we've discovered here will never become public knowledge. The implications are too significant, the potential for panic too great. Sir, with respect, don't the American people have a right to know?" Byrd's laugh was bitter. "Commander, 3 days ago, I received a communication that wasn't sent through any of our normal channels. It appeared on my desk, written in perfect English, with details about our mission that only a handful of people should know." He handed me a single sheet of paper. The message was brief but chilling. "Admiral Byrd, your presence in our territory has been noted. We have no desire for conflict, but continued intrusion will be interpreted as hostile intent. You have 72 hours to withdraw your forces beyond 60 degrees south latitude. This is not a negotiation." The paper felt strange in my hands, not quite like any material I'd handled before, and the text seemed to shimmer slightly in the lamplight. "Who sent this?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "The same intelligence that's been watching us since we arrived. The same intelligence that could have destroyed our helicopters, but chose instead to disable them. They're giving us a chance to leave, Commander. The question is whether we're smart enough to take it." Entry 7, November 2nd, 1946. Final operations meeting. Today, Admiral Byrd made the decision that would define the rest of his career and haunt him until his death. Operation High Jump was being terminated, effective immediately. All personnel would be evacuated within 48 hours, all equipment beyond basic necessities abandoned, and all records of our encounters classified at the highest levels. The official reason given to the press would be unexpected weather conditions and equipment failures. The truth would be buried so deep that even most of the personnel involved would never know what they had really encountered. In our final intelligence briefing, Byrd addressed the core team, 15 men who had seen enough to understand that we weren't alone in the universe, and that we were woefully unprepared for the implications of that reality. "Gentlemen," Byrd began, his voice carrying the weight of defeat, "what we've encountered in Antarctica represents a paradigm shift in human understanding. We have made contact with an intelligence possessing technology decades, possibly centuries ahead of our own. They have demonstrated both their superiority and their restraint." He paused, studying each of us in turn. "We were warned, not just to leave, but never to return. That warning came with an implicit threat that I have no doubt they possess the capability to carry out." Lieutenant Colonel Henderson, who had been sceptical throughout the entire operation, finally spoke up. "Admiral, Are we really going to let them dictate terms to the United States Navy? Bird's expression was grim. Colonel, in the past month, we've lost 2 helicopters, 3 men, and a submarine that hasn't been heard from since it went under the ice near their territory. Every encounter has demonstrated that they could destroy our entire task force without significant effort. We're not retreating because we're cowards. We're retreating because we're outgunned. The room fell silent. The reality of our situation was undeniable, but accepting it went against everything we'd been trained to believe about American military superiority. "Sir," I asked, what happens now? Do we just pretend none of this happened?" Bird walked to the window, staring out at the Antarctic landscape that had changed everything we thought we knew about our world. "Commander, I'm going to tell you something that must never appear in any official record. Before we leave, I'm going to attempt direct communication with their leadership. I need to understand their intentions, their capabilities, and most importantly, their plans for future contact with humanity." "Is that wise, sir?" "Probably not, but it's necessary." He turned back to face us. "Whatever's down there has been watching us for longer than we realise. They've demonstrated restraint so far, but that could change if they perceive us as a growing threat. I need to know if coexistence is possible, or if we're looking at an inevitable conflict." None of us spoke. The implications were too vast, too terrifying to process easily. "One more thing," Bird continued. "Each of you will be required to sign documents stating that you will never discuss what you've seen here. Your families will be told you participated in routine cold weather training exercises. Your service records will reflect nothing unusual about this deployment." He pulled out a stack of papers from his desk. "I know this goes against your principles. It goes against mine too, but the alternative is panic on a scale that could destabilize society itself. How do you tell the world that we've discovered an advanced civilization living beneath the ice, with technology that makes our most advanced weapons look like stone tools?" We signed the documents. What choice did we have? Entry 8, November the 5th, 1946. Personal log, final entry. Today, Admiral Byrd made contact. I wasn't supposed to be present for the communication attempt, but Byrd requested me as a witness. We travelled by helicopter to coordinates that had been transmitted to us through the same mysterious channel as the previous warning. The location was a flat expanse of ice approximately 50 miles from our base, marked only by a perfect circle of disturbed snow. We landed at the circle's edge and waited. The Antarctic wind was unusually calm, creating a silence so complete it felt oppressive. After 20 minutes, 3 disc-shaped craft appeared on the horizon, approaching with their characteristic impossible grace. They settled into a triangular formation around our position, hovering silently 10 feet above the ground. As before, their surfaces were mirror-smooth and covered with flowing symbols that seemed to pulse with internal light. Then something unprecedented happened. One of the craft extended what appeared to be a ramp, not mechanical, but formed from the same flowing material as the hull. A figure appeared at the opening. I've struggled for hours to find words to describe what I saw. The being was humanoid in basic structure, but clearly not human. Tall, perhaps 7 feet, with proportions that were almost familiar, but somehow wrong. The skin appeared translucent, with an underlying luminescence that suggested biological processes unlike anything on Earth. The features were angular, refined, with large eyes that held an intelligence both ancient and alien. But what struck me most was the complete absence of hostility. There was curiosity, perhaps mild concern, but no aggression or malice. The being approached Admiral Byrd directly, stopping approximately 10 feet away. When it spoke, the words formed directly in our minds rather than through sound, a form of communication that was simultaneously intimate and unsettling. "Admiral Byrd, you have shown wisdom in accepting our warnings. Your species stands at a crossroads of development. The choices made in the coming decades will determine whether contact becomes beneficial or necessary for your survival." Byrd, to his credit, remained composed despite the obvious strain of the encounter. "What do you want from us?" "We want nothing from you. We have observed your species for millennia, watching your development with interest. Your recent mastery of atomic energy has attracted our attention more directly. Such power, in the hands of a species still learning wisdom, represents a threat not only to yourselves but to the stability of this world. Are you threatening us? We are informing you. Your activities in this region will cease immediately. The knowledge you have gained here will remain contained. In return, we will continue our policy of non-interference in your affairs, for now. The implications were staggering. They had been watching us for thousands of years, and our recent technological advancement had forced them to take a more active role in monitoring our activities. "What happens if we refuse?" Bird asked. The being's expression didn't change, but the air around us seemed to grow colder. "Your species is young, Admiral. You have not yet learned that there are consequences to actions, boundaries that must not be crossed. We have maintained this world's stability for far longer than your civilization has existed. We will continue to do so, with or without your cooperation." The communication ended abruptly. The being returned to its craft, the ramp dissolved back into the hull, and all three discs accelerated into the sky at speeds that defied physics. Bird was quiet during the flight back to base. Only when we were alone in his quarters did he speak. "Commander, I want you to promise me something. If anything happens to me, if I die under suspicious circumstances or disappear, I want you to make sure the truth survives somehow. Not the official truth, but what really happened here." "Sir, what are you planning?" "I'm going to give them what they want. Complete evacuation, total secrecy, and an end to Antarctic operations. But I'm also going to make sure that someone, somewhere, knows what we encountered. Because this won't be the end of it, Commander, this is just the beginning." 3 days later, we left Antarctica. The official report stated that equipment failures and weather conditions had forced an early termination of the mission. Admiral Byrd gave a brief interview to Chilean press on our way home, where he made statements about enemies that could fly from pole to pole in minutes. Statements that were quickly dismissed as metaphorical references to future aviation technology. But I knew better. He was trying to warn the world, in the only way he could, about what was waiting beneath the ice. Final entry, Mason Hale, I'm dying. Cancer, doctors say. Though I suspect it might be related to something I was exposed to during those weeks in Antarctica 47 years ago. I've carried this secret for nearly half a century, watching as the world moved closer to the precipice that entity warned us about. Admiral Byrd died in 1957, and with him went the last official connection to what we discovered. He never spoke publicly about the encounter, but he also never returned to Antarctica despite numerous opportunities. He knew, as I know, that some doors should remain closed. Over the years, I've watched for signs that they're still watching us. UFO sightings, unexplained aerial phenomena, technological advances that seem to leap beyond normal developmental curves. I believe they've been intervening subtly, perhaps preventing us from destroying ourselves before we develop the wisdom to handle our own power. But I also believe that patience is not infinite. Recent events suggest we're approaching another crossroads. The Cold War has ended, but new threats are emerging. Environmental destruction, nuclear proliferation, and a growing instability that suggests we haven't learned the lessons they hoped we would. I've hidden this journal for 47 years, waiting for the right time to reveal the truth. With my death approaching, I realise that time may never come. But perhaps, if this account survives, future generations will be better prepared for what's coming. Because they're still down there, watching, waiting. And the warning they gave Admiral Byrd still stands. There's something under the ice. Something that has been protecting this world far longer than we've existed on it. They gave us a chance to mature, to develop wisdom alongside our technology. Whether we've succeeded or failed remains to be seen. But next time, and there will be a next time, we may not leave. The journal of Lieutenant Commander Mason Hale was discovered in a safety deposit box in Phoenix, Arizona, in 1996, 3 years after his death from cancer. His nephew, David Hale, initially published excerpts online before the entire document mysteriously disappeared from all servers within 48 hours. David Hale himself died in a car accident 2 weeks later. This complete transcription was reconstructed from archived copies found on defunct servers and private hard drives. The authenticity has never been verified, and the US Navy maintains that Operation High Jump was a routine training and research mission that concluded successfully within normal parameters. Admiral Richard E. Byrd's post-expedition interview in Chile, where he spoke of enemies that could fly from pole to pole, remains a matter of public record. His subsequent removal from Antarctic operations and his reluctance to discuss the mission in detail has never been officially explained. Antarctica remains under international treaty, with military activities strictly prohibited. No nation has attempted another operation of high jump scale in the region where Lieutenant Commander Hale reported his encounters. The truth, as always, remains buried beneath the ice. Tonight, I'll be your guide on a journey into one of the coldest and most enduring mysteries of the Cold War era. I want you to picture this. It's a winter night deep in the Ural Mountains, 1959. A group of young adventurers huddles in a tent on the snowy slope of a peak ominously called Dead Mountain. They're laughing, jotting down journal entries by flashlight, and planning tomorrow's trek. They don't know it yet, but this will be their last night alive. This is the true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, a mystery that has haunted investigators for decades. My name is James, and I've spent weeks poring over old case files, diaries, and witness reports about what happened to those 9 hikers in 1959. The more I dig, the more the Dyatlov Pass incident feels like a nightmare straddling the line between fact and fiction. So, let's delve into it together step by step as if we're investigators unravelling a case file. The story begins in late January 1959. 10 experienced ski hikers from the Ural Polytechnical Institute set out on an expedition to reach a mountain called a Torton in the northern Urals. They were all in their early 20s, 7 men and 2 women, except for one older instructor, and were led by a 23-year-old radio engineering student named Igor Dyatlov. On January 23, 1959, the Dyatlov group received their route book and left the city of Sverdlovsk, today's Yekaterinburg, by train. You can imagine them on that train, excited, full of youthful bravado, maybe singing along to a mandolin one of them brought for the journey. After 2 days on trains, the party reached Ivdel, a remote town at the edge of the northern Ural Mountains, which also housed a Soviet Gulag camp for criminals. From Ivdel, they travelled by bus and then hitched a ride in the back of a woodcutter's truck to a settlement called Vizhai, the last inhabited village to the north. The locals in Vizhai must have looked at these university students with a mix of admiration and concern. The route they planned to traverse was rated Category 3, the most difficult, and they were attempting it in February, the cruelest time of year. On January 27th, the Dyatlov group left Vizhai and began their trek into the wilderness. One member, Yuri Yudin, had been struggling with health issues. He had rheumatism and a congenital defect that caused knee pain. By January 28th, Yudin's joint pain became too severe. Reluctantly, he turned back toward Vizhai, unable to continue. He had no idea that by saving himself, he was sealing his fate as the expedition's sole survivor. Yuri Yudin would never see his friends alive again. The remaining 9 hikers pressed on into the wild, unaware of the fate that awaited them. Through diaries and photographs recovered later, investigators have pieced together their route. By January 31st, the group had reached the edge of a highland area and cached surplus food and equipment in a wooded valley to be used for the return trip. They joked around, took photos, and even made a little mock newspaper they titled the Evening Autoton, in which one entry humorously proclaimed, "From now on, we know that the snowmen exist," likely a tongue-in-cheek reference to local Yeti legends. Despite the exhaustion and cold, their spirits were high. On February 1st, the team started to move through a mountain pass, later named Dyatlov Pass after this incident, with the plan to camp on the other side that night. But the weather turned on them. A howling snowstorm and blinding wind caused Dyatlov's team to lose their direction on the barren slopes. Instead of crossing the pass into the shelter of the valley beyond, they had veered west, finding themselves on the flank of a mountain called Kolat, which in the local Mansi language means dead mountain. By the time they realised their mistake, it was late in the day and visibility was near zero from the blowing snow. Rather than descend 1.5 kilometres down into the forest for cover, Igor Dyatlov decided to pitch their tent right there on the mountainside in the open. Perhaps he didn't want to lose the altitude they'd gained, or perhaps he wanted to prove they could handle camping on an exposed slope in a blizzard. The 9 of them set up their large tent on the bare snow, chopping into the slope for a flat spot. It was a decision that would be heavily scrutinised later. That evening of February 1st, 1959 must have been brutal. Temperatures were around minus 20 degrees Celsius, and winds roared over the pass. Still, inside the tent, the group was relatively secure. They had a warm dinner. Later forensic analysis of their stomach contents showed they ate around 6 to 7 p.m. In one of the last photos recovered from their cameras, they are seen joking and smiling as they set up camp in the twilight on February 1st. Despite the extreme cold and howling wind outside, they seemed in good spirits, jotting down journal entries and chatting as they settled in for the night. They could not have imagined the terror that was coming. Something happened in the dark early hours of February 2nd that changed everything. We don't have eyewitnesses to describe it. All we have is the evidence left behind, and that evidence reads like the opening scene of a horror film. Sometime after midnight, the tent was suddenly slashed open from the inside. The 9 campers, who had been sleeping or resting, burst out of their tent into a howling snowstorm in the pitch black of night. They left behind almost all their gear, boots, coats, hats, sleeping bags, axes, as if fleeing an imminent threat. Imagine the situation. It's minus 30 degrees Celsius, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, outside, and yet something scared or startled them so badly that they ran out half-dressed and barefoot into the blizzard. Why? What could have terrified them, or otherwise compelled them to abandon their only shelter and run into certain death? That's the question investigators have grappled with for over 60 years. When the group failed to return to Vizhai by February 12th as planned, there wasn't immediate alarm. Delays of a few days were common for such expeditions. But as day after day passed with no word, the hikers' families grew anxious. By February 20th, the relatives demanded a search and rescue operation. The Ural Polytechnic Institute sent student volunteers to scour the route, and soon the Soviet army and local militia police joined in, with planes and helicopters dispatched to aid the search. Rescuers faced brutal weather themselves, traversing deep snow and scanning miles of desolate terrain. Among the searchers was a student named Mikhail Sharavin, who on February 26th would make a chilling discovery. On February 26th, 1959, Sharavin's search team was moving along the slopes of Kolatchakal when he spotted something odd sticking out of the snow. As they got closer, they realised it was a corner of the missing group's tent, collapsed and half buried in the snow. Sharavin used an ice pick to hack open the tent's entrance, which was blocked with snow. The sight inside the tent baffled him. The tent's canvas had been slashed open from the inside with a knife, and although it was damaged and partially snow-filled, almost all the hikers' belongings were still neatly arranged inside. He found blankets and coats laid out, a row of boots, axes and flashlights set to the sides, a map and official papers, a little pile of money and even a flask of alcohol. In one corner was a plate with slices of sayalo pork fat, as if someone had been in the middle of fixing a snack. It was like a snapshot frozen in time. The tent felt orderly, not like it had been ripped apart by an external force. Sharavin later said it was as if the campers had been interrupted in the middle of dinner, then fled in a rush. The scene sent shivers down his spine. Why would experienced hikers cut open their only shelter and run away without boots or coats? Outside the tent, the search team found footprints in the snow, and they only deepened the mystery. There were 9 sets of prints, which matched the number of missing hikers. They could see the impressions of feet wearing only socks, or a single shoe, and some barefoot. You could even make out toe marks in the frozen snow. The tracks indicated that the hikers had not run in a wild panic, but rather walked fast or at a hurried shuffle down the slope in an organised single file. The rescuers followed these tracks downhill in the direction of a dense forest. Incredibly, the footprints continued for about 500 metres before they were obscured by fresh snow. It was as if the group had intentionally headed toward the forest, perhaps seeking shelter or regrouping. Sharavin and the others were utterly perplexed. What on earth could have made these seasoned hikers leave their tent in sub-zero cold, partially dressed and even barefoot, walking away calmly into the night? With dusk approaching on February 26th, the searchers had to pause the search until morning, haunted by the enigma they'd uncovered. The next day, the search parties fanned out from the tent down toward the forest. At the forest's edge, under a large Siberian cedar tree, Sharavin and his comrades found the charred remains of a small fire. Near that fire lay the first 2 bodies. What they saw defied explanation. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko were found side by side in the snow, shoeless and dressed only in their underwear. The branches on the cedar above them were broken up to 5 meters high, as if someone had climbed up into the tree. Indeed, bits of skin and torn clothing were found on the bark. It looked like one of them had frantically clambered up the cedar, either to get a better view of the area, perhaps trying to spot the tent in the dark, or to escape something. Krivonishenko's corpse had burns on parts of his body, and in a grim detail he had a piece of flesh missing from his right hand. It turned out he had bitten off a chunk of his own knuckle, possibly in an attempt to stay conscious or stifle a scream while dying of cold. Both men's hands and feet were deep reddish-brown, a sign of frostbite, and maybe the last attempt to warm their limbs by the fire. The tree's branches had been stripped for kindling, but the fire they managed to build was small and had burned out by the time they died. The image of these 2 friends huddled by a dead fire, slowly freezing to death in their underwear under a sky of endless black, is something I can't easily shake off. About 300 meters away from the cedar tree, toward the tent, the searchers found the body of Igor Dyatlov. He was lying face up in the snow, head oriented toward the tent up the slope, as if he had been trying to crawl back that way. Dyatlov was better dressed than the 2 under the tree. He wore a flannel shirt, a sweater, and pants, but notably, he had no coat and no boots, only socks on his feet. One arm was frozen upright, reaching toward the sky, clutching a small birch branch. His other hand was pressed to his chest. People who saw his body remarked that he appeared to be protecting something in his jacket or close to his heart. Perhaps a photograph or his notebook, though nothing of note was found on his chest. His face, when they cleared the snow, was strangely calm, eyes open. Not far from Dyatlov, searchers found Zina Kolmogorova, the 22-year-old female student in the group. Zina was better dressed than Igor. She had on 2 sweaters and 2 pants, but she too lacked boots, wearing only socks. Her body was turned toward the tent and her arms were extended forward, bent at the elbows, as if she had been crawling uphill on her stomach, desperately trying to get back to the tent before the cold overtook her. On Zina's right side, the searchers noted a long, bright red bruise running along her torso, resembling a blunt force injury from a baton or the butt of a rifle. It was an odd injury to see, given that she had no other major external wounds. It took a few more days until March 5th to find Rustem Slobodin, the last of these first 5 bodies. Slobodin, 23, was discovered face down in the snow about 480 meters from the cedar. roughly halfway back toward the tent. He was dressed more warmly than the others. He had a long-sleeve undershirt, a sweater, 2 pairs of pants, 4 pairs of socks, and 1 felt-lined boot on his right foot. But his head was bare and his left foot was only in a sock. In his right hand, Slobodin clenched a small pocket knife, closed. An autopsy would later reveal that Slobodin had a fracture in his skull, about 7 inches long, consistent with a blunt impact. However, this crack in his skull was not deemed a fatal wound. The medical examiner thought Rustem could have sustained it during a fall and continued moving for at least an hour afterward. Like Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, Doroshenko and Krivonishenko, Rustem Slobodin ultimately died of hypothermia. In fact, the first 5 bodies found all had no life-threatening external injuries. They had perished from the unforgiving cold. Slobodin's watch was found shattered and stopped at 8:45, though it's unclear if that was 8:45 a.m. or p.m, or even 8:45 on a different date. It was as if time itself froze at that moment. Now imagine being Yuri Yudin, the one who had turned back, called in to identify the bodies of your friends. One by one, the first 5 corpses were airlifted to the morgue in Ivdel for autopsy and identification. Yudin, with a heavy heart, confirmed their identities. But 4 members of the Dyatlov party were still missing. Weeks passed with no sign of them. The winter snows began to melt under the early spring sun. It wasn't until May, nearly 3 months later, that nature revealed the remaining victims, turning the mystery into something even more haunting. On May 4th, a Mansi tribesman named Kurin and his dog were assisting the search, when the dog picked up a scent near a rocky ravine further into the woods from the cedar tree. About 75 metres beyond the cedar and 1,500 metres from the tent, in a snow-filled ravine, searchers discovered a few torn pieces of clothing on a branch. Digging down, they uncovered the final 4 bodies buried under nearly 4 metres of snow. These were Lyudmila, Luda Dubinina, Semyon, Alexander, Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Alexander Kolovatov. They were lying about 75 metres further into the forest from the cedar, at the bottom of that ravine. Notably, 3 of the 4 were better dressed than the others, and it appeared they had taken clothes from those who died earlier. Dubinina, for example, was found wearing Krivonishenko's torn and burned brown trousers, and her foot was wrapped in a piece of his wool sweater. Zolotaryov, the 38-year-old, was found wearing Dubinina's faux fur coat and hat. Kolovatov had put on a spare sweater and pants, likely from one of the others. This exchange of clothing suggests that when some members of the group died, the last survivors stripped the dead of usable clothing to keep themselves alive, a tragic but practical act of survival. But the condition of these 4 bodies deepened the mystery rather than solved it. Unlike the first 5, 3 of these 4 had fatal physical injuries that were utterly horrifying. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had suffered a massive skull fracture. His skull was literally crushed, the fracture measuring about 8 inches. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov both had their chests caved in, with multiple ribs broken on each side. Dubinina had 10 ribs fractured, and Zolotaryov had 5 ribs fractured. A forensic doctor who examined the bodies said that the force required to produce such injuries would have been extremely high, comparable to that of a car crash. In other words, something had delivered an immense pressure or impact to their bodies. Strangely, none of these 3 had any external wounds or bruises corresponding to the lethal internal damage. It was as if they'd been hit by a shockwave or squeezed by a tremendous force without breaking the skin. The 4th person in the ravine, Alexander Kolovatov, had a less clear cause of death. He had a broken nose, an open wound behind his ear, and a deformed neck, but his injuries were not as catastrophic as the others. It's believed Kolovatov also died of hypothermia, possibly after sustaining some trauma. And then there were the gruesome details that truly made this case infamous. All 4 of these people in the ravine had some form of soft tissue damage to the head and face that wasn't seen in the others. Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, part of her lips, and even a bit of her skull bone. Semyon Zolotaryov was missing his eyeballs, and Alexander Kolovatov was missing his eyebrows. These shocking injuries naturally gave rise to lurid theories. Was the group attacked by someone or something that ripped out tongues and eyes? However, the medical experts had a more mundane explanation. The 4 in the ravine were found in a stream bed. During the 3 months before they were found, water and scavenging animals likely caused the soft tissue of their faces to decompose or be eaten away. In Dubinina's case, the autopsy noted that her stomach contained about 100 grams of coagulated blood, suggesting her heart was still beating when her tongue was removed, meaning the tongue likely decomposed or was scavenged very soon after her death. As horrifying as these injuries sound, investigators believe they were post-mortem effects, not violence inflicted while alive. Still, when these details became public, they fueled wild speculation about murderous attackers or supernatural evil. It didn't help that Zolotaryov was found with a camera around his neck, different from the other cameras found in the tent, and his hand holding a pen and notepad, as if he died trying to write something down. Unfortunately, whatever he intended to note was never written. The pad was blank. The investigators in 1959 were at a loss to come up with a satisfying explanation for all this. A criminal inquest began as a matter of procedure, since several of the deaths involved injuries. They first suspected that the native Manatee people, reindeer herders of the region, might have attacked the campers for trespassing on sacred land. But that theory was quickly dispelled. The only footprints found at the scene were those of the hikers themselves, and there were no signs of hand-to-hand struggle on the bodies. In fact, the Mansi had helped in the search, and had no history of hostile encounters with hikers. Next, investigators considered an avalanche, but the pattern of the tent and the footprints suggested otherwise. We'll revisit that later. As for animal attack, no large animal tracks were found, and the violent injuries didn't have the telltale marks of claws or teeth. The Soviet authorities were left to conclude that no other humans were involved in the Dyatlov group's demise. One of the doctors famously commented that the force which killed Dubinina and Zolotaryov was more than any human could inflict. No human could be powerful enough to cause such damage. One piece of information emerged that added a strange Cold War twist. When the forensic analysts tested the hikers' clothing, they found unusual levels of radiation on some of the garments. Specifically, Dubinina's brown sweater and Krivonishenko's wool pants were found to be radioactive. This discovery didn't make sense in a hiking context, and was not something the average person could detect. It was only found because one investigator had access to a Geiger counter. The presence of radiation fueled speculation that the Dyatlov party had encountered some secret weapon or radioactive fallout. However, a closer look provided a more ordinary explanation. Yuri Krivonishenko had previously worked at the Masyak nuclear facility and was involved in cleaning up a major nuclear accident in 1957, the Kishtim disaster. It's very possible his clothes were contaminated from that event and still carried traces of radiation. Likewise, Alexander Kolevatov had studied nuclear physics and worked at a secret institute in Moscow, which might explain contamination on some items. In short, the radiation might not have had anything to do with the incident. It could have been a red herring. Still, the fact that their skin reportedly had a deep tan, and some of their hair had turned grey when relatives saw the bodies only intensified rumours of some nuclear or chemical exposure. Authorities claimed the skin tanning was a natural mummification effect from lying in the sun and cold for weeks, and that hair can turn colour from exposure or the embalming process. But to grieving families in 1959, radioactive clothes and orange skin sounded like the stuff of government cover-ups and sci-fi nightmares. By May 1959, the official investigation was drawing to a close without a concrete answer. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, was under pressure to wrap it up. In his final report, Ivanov wrote that the hikers died because of the effect of an unknown compelling force. It was a vague catch-all phrase, essentially admitting that they couldn't figure it out. No external culprits could be identified, and the case was therefore closed without any criminal charges. The files were stamped secret and filed away in a Soviet archive. The Dyatlov Pass area was also declared off-limits to other expeditions for the next 3 years, supposedly to prevent any more tragedies, though some see it as an attempt to keep curious eyes away. The inquest's official finding was that the group members died due to a compelling natural force, a phrase that raised more questions than it answered. Imagine the weight of that silence. 9 young lives lost, and their families were told they would never know exactly how or why. In the Soviet Union of 1959, that was that. Some of the parents and siblings sensed a cover-up. Zina Kolmogorova's mother, for instance, and Igor Dyatlov's parents all received hushed warnings from officials. The families were explicitly told, "You will never know the truth, so stop asking questions." In those days, if the party or KGB told you to be quiet, you stayed quiet, out of fear. So the families buried their children without knowing what really happened, and the Dyatlov incident faded into an eerie Cold War legend whispered about in Ural classrooms and mountaineering clubs. As for Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor who wasn't even there, he lived the rest of his life with survivor's guilt and a burning desire to find the truth. Yudin repeatedly insisted that his friends did not die due to some simple natural accident. He felt in his gut that something else, something man-made, had to have caused it. In interviews before his death in 2013, Yuri Yudin openly voiced his belief that the Soviet authorities knew more than they let on about the incident. In fact, not long before he died, Yudin publicly stated that he believed his teammates had been taken out of the tent at gunpoint and murdered. He even speculated that Dubinina's tongue was cut out by perpetrators because she was the most outspoken of the group. These are incredibly serious accusations, and they were never proven. Yudin admitted he had no evidence, just deep suspicions after a lifetime of thinking about it. Whether Yudin was right or wrong, his perspective shows just how deeply the Dyatlov mystery can burrow into someone's soul. So, here we are decades later, with more questions than answers. I'm a modern-day investigator, combing through the remnants of old reports and new theories. As I piece together each bit of evidence, I feel that cold wind from Dead Mountain blowing through the decades. The Dyatlov Pass incident has become one of the world's most enduring mysteries, precisely because it sits at the crossroads of the explicable and the baffling. Over the years, numerous theories have been put forward to explain it, some grounded in scientific reasoning, others veering into the paranormal or conspiratorial. Let's examine these theories one by one, like branching investigative paths, and see where each leads. Keep in mind, any good explanation must account for all the odd details we've discussed: the torn tent, the state of undress, the bizarre injuries, the radiation, the reports of strange lights in the sky, the secrecy. It's a tall order, but let's walk these paths together. The first path is the one that the Russian authorities themselves eventually settled on: an avalanche. For many, this is the most straightforward explanation. Picture the scenario. The Dyatlov group is asleep in their tent on the slope, when suddenly a slab of heavy snow above them fractures and slides down onto the tent. The tent fabric begins to collapse and they hear the roar of snow. In a flash, the group panics. They believe a full avalanche is about to bury them. In seconds, they grab a knife, slash open the tent from the inside, because the entrance is blocked or hard to open under the weight of snow, and they flee into the night wearing whatever they had on at that moment. This theory gained significant traction, and in fact in 2019 to 2020 the Russian government reinvestigated Dyatlov Pass and concluded that a slab avalanche was the official cause of death. Later that year, a team of scientists published new computer simulations supporting the plausibility of an avalanche. In this case, the most appealing aspect of the avalanche theory is that the hiker's actions no longer seem irrational under this lens. If you believe an avalanche is about to crush you, doing whatever it takes to get out of the tent and moving to safer ground is exactly the right response. And indeed, everything the Dyatlov group did after leaving the tent can be seen as textbook survival behaviour once you assume an avalanche threat. The theory goes like this. A slab of snow, perhaps loosened by the wind or the heat from their stove earlier, slid and partially buried the tent, making loud cracks and rumbles. The experienced hikers immediately and calmly initiated an emergency evacuation. They cut their way out of the tent and headed for ground that would be safe from a larger avalanche, which in this case meant moving toward the tree line on the far side of the pass. They didn't take time to put on boots or grab equipment because every second mattered. In their minds, they had to get clear of the avalanche path. In just their socks and light clothes, they made it about a mile downslope to the forest. There they regrouped and tried to stay warm by building a fire. We saw evidence of that by the cedar. They also dug a snow cave as a shelter. The ravine where the last four were found had branches laid out on the floor, signs. If this is your first time with sleep theories, welcome to our corner of the internet where we explore the stories that keep us awake at night, the mysteries that official reports never quite explain, and the questions that linger long after the news cycle moves on. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got investigations that will challenge everything you think you know about the world around us. My name is Daniel Rhodes, and for 32 years I analysed threats that didn't officially exist. NSA, CIA, a few acronyms that still don't have Wikipedia pages. I spent my career in the spaces between the lines of declassified documents. When I retired in 2012, I thought I was done with secrets. I thought I could finally sleep without wondering what shadows were moving in the dark corners of geopolitics. Then flight MH370 vanished, and sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. March 8th, 2014, 12:41 a.m. local time. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 pushes back from Gate C1 at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, 53 years old, 18,365 flight hours. First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, 27 years old, transitioning to the Boeing 777. Between them, they carried the lives of 237 passengers and crew toward what should have been a routine 6-hour flight to Beijing Capital International Airport. The flight proceeded normally for exactly 38 minutes. At 1:19 a.m, First Officer Hamid's voice crackled through the radio. "Good night, Malaysian 370. It was the last transmission anyone would officially acknowledge receiving from the aircraft. Within 2 minutes, the plane's transponder went silent. The secondary surveillance radar that had been tracking MH370 across Malaysian airspace suddenly showed nothing but empty sky. For the next 4 hours, Malaysian air traffic control waited. They made calls, they checked systems, they assumed technical difficulties, weather interference, communication failures, anything except the truth that was already unfolding 35,000 feet above the South China Sea. The plane had not crashed. It had not exploded. It had simply ceased to exist on every screen, every monitor, every system designed to track commercial aircraft across one of the world's busiest flight corridors. But here's what the public wasn't told in those first crucial hours. MH370 didn't just vanish from Malaysian radar. It disappeared from secondary surveillance systems across 3 countries simultaneously. The odds of spontaneous coordinated system failure across sovereign airspace boundaries are so astronomically low that they approach impossibility. I learned this not from CNN or the BBC, but from a phone call I received 6 months after the disappearance. The caller identified himself only as Mitchell, a voice I hadn't heard since a classified briefing in Langley sometime around 2009. "Danny," he said, using a nickname only 5 people on Earth were authorized to use, "you still got that security clearance." "Retired, not revoked," I replied. "Why?" "Look at Diego Garcia," and stop trusting the satellite data. The line went dead. Mitchell had always been a man of few words, but this was cryptic even for him. Diego Garcia, the US military atoll in the British Indian Ocean Territory, one of the most secretive bases on the planet. What could a missing Malaysian airliner possibly have to do with a facility that officially didn't conduct operations that required congressional oversight? I spent the next week telling myself to let it go. I was retired. I had a small house in Vermont, a garden that needed tending, and a pension that would keep me comfortable until the inevitable heart attack or cancer diagnosis that seems to find everyone in my former line of work. But Mitchell's words echoed in my mind with the persistence of a smoke alarm at 3 a.m. So I started digging. The first thing I discovered was that Diego Garcia's location placed it roughly 2,400 miles southwest of MH370's last known position, exactly within the range of a Boeing 777 carrying the fuel load that MH370 had taken on in Kuala Lumpur. The second thing I discovered was that there had been a suspicious gap in radar coverage along what I came to call the Southern Silence Corridor, a stretch of airspace between Indonesia and the southern Indian Ocean, where civilian and military radar systems created a blind spot large enough to hide a commercial airliner. The third thing I discovered changed everything. Inmarsat, the British satellite communications company, had been quietly collecting data from MH370 long after the plane's transponder went dark. Their satellites had continued to exchange handshake signals with the aircraft for 6 hours and 11 minutes after the last radar contact. 6 hours. The plane had not crashed in the South China Sea, as initial search efforts assumed. It had continued flying, following a path that led it far from any intended destination. The official investigation eventually acknowledged this data, but only after Malaysian authorities had spent weeks searching in entirely the wrong location. By the time search efforts shifted to the southern Indian Ocean, any physical evidence had been scattered by currents, weather, and time across an area roughly the size of the continental United States. But I had access to resources that the general public and most journalists did not. Through a network of former colleagues who owed favours to other former colleagues, I obtained copies of the raw Inmarsat data, complete with technical annotations that had been redacted from public releases. What I found in those margins made my hands shake as I read. The satellite pings showed that MH370 had not simply flown south and crashed. The aircraft had made a series of altitude changes and course corrections that suggested active piloting throughout its final hours. More troubling, the ping intervals showed periods where the aircraft appeared to be flying in holding patterns, circles in the sky, as if waiting for clearance to land somewhere. I cross-referenced the ping data with maritime traffic records from the Indian Ocean shipping lanes. On the night of March 8, 2014, there had been an unusual absence of commercial vessels along MH370's projected flight path. Ships that should have been in the area according to their filed routes had mysteriously altered course or delayed departure from their previous ports. It was as if someone had cleared a corridor through one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. Then I found the eyewitness accounts. In September 2014, residents of Kuda Huvadhu Island in the Maldives reported seeing a low-flying aircraft around 6:15 a.m. local time on March 8th, roughly 6 hours after MH370's last radar contact. The aircraft was white with red stripes, consistent with Malaysia Airlines livery. It was flying unusually low, heading southwest toward the open ocean. The Maldivian government initially investigated these reports, then suddenly classified them and refused to comment further. When pressed by international media, officials claimed the sightings were not credible and suggested residents had mistaken a domestic flight for the missing airliner. But I knew something the Maldivian government apparently didn't want publicised. There were no scheduled domestic flights over Kuda Huvadhu at 6:15 a.m. on March 8th, 2014. The island's airport had been closed for runway maintenance since March 5th. The nearest aircraft that morning should have been a Maldivian air taxi flight that wasn't scheduled to depart Malé until 7:30 a.m, more than an hour later, and travelling in the opposite direction. Southwest of the Maldives lay 800 miles of empty ocean, then Diego Garcia. I began to construct a timeline that made my former career in intelligence analysis seem quaint by comparison. Malaysia Airlines Flight 3. 70 had not crashed. It had been diverted along a carefully planned route that avoided radar detection, maritime traffic, and civilian observation until the very last moment, when residents of a remote island happened to look up at the right time and see something they were never supposed to witness. But why? What could be worth orchestrating the disappearance of a commercial airliner and the deaths of 239 innocent people? The answer lay not in the aircraft itself, but in its passenger manifest. Every intelligence analyst learns to look for patterns that exist just below the surface of apparent randomness. Flight MH370's passenger list contained several patterns that should have triggered security reviews long before the aircraft ever left the ground. 20 passengers worked for Freescale Semiconductor, a Texas-based company specializing in microprocessors and embedded systems. They were traveling to Beijing for a technical conference, carrying laptops and documentation related to advanced radar and stealth technology applications. Among them was Dr. Chen Wei, a lead engineer on what Freescale internally called Project Mirror, research into electronic systems that could manipulate radar signatures in real time. 4 passengers were travelling on stolen Austrian and Italian passports. The men who had stolen these documents were identified within days of the disappearance, but the identities of the individuals who had used them to board MH370 remain unknown. Interpol confirmed that the stolen passport holders had purchased their tickets with cash through a travel agency in Bangkok that had no record of the transactions beyond the basic booking information. Then there was Yen Lo. Yen Lo was listed on the passenger manifest as a software consultant, travelling from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. But Yen Lo was not a software consultant. According to files I obtained through channels that I cannot and will not identify, Yen Lo was a former Chinese military cyber analyst who had been quietly developing quantum encryption algorithms for the People's Liberation Army's 3rd Department, their Signals Intelligence Division. 6 months before MH370's disappearance, Yen Lo had approached the CIA through an intermediary, claiming he wanted to defect. He possessed what he described as breakthrough research in quantum-resistant encryption that could render current Western surveillance capabilities obsolete within a decade. The agency had been in preliminary negotiations with Yen Lo since December 2013, but those talks had stalled over disagreements about his financial demands and the security of his family members still living in mainland China. What Yen Lo didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his communications with the CIA had been intercepted by the National Security Agency's Special Collection Service, operating out of the US Embassy in Kuala Lumpur. The NSA had been tracking Yen Lo's movements, monitoring his communications, and building a profile of his research capabilities since October 2013. I spent weeks trying to reconstruct the intelligence picture that would have been available to decision-makers in the days before MH370's disappearance. What I found was a convergence of strategic interests that painted a very different picture of the flight's final hours. Freescale Semiconductor's largest institutional shareholder was a private equity firm called Jacob Partners, which had been linked in classified reports to DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, funding for experimental radar systems. The 20 Freescale employees on MH370 weren't just attending a technical conference. They were carrying prototype hardware and source code for systems that could theoretically render aircraft invisible to conventional radar. Yen Lo's quantum encryption research represented a potential paradigm shift in signals intelligence. If his algorithms proved viable, they could invalidate decades of NSA investment in cryptographic analysis capabilities. More immediately, they could allow Chinese intelligence services to communicate in ways that Western agencies could never decrypt or even detect. The convergence was too perfect to be coincidental. On a single flight, travelling from a region with minimal air traffic control oversight toward Beijing, where both the Freescale technology and Yen Lo's research would disappear into Chinese military development programs, were the components of what could become a decisive intelligence advantage for America's primary strategic rival. But there was one more pattern I couldn't ignore. 3 weeks before MH370's disappearance, a Boeing 777 identical to the aircraft that would become Flight 370 had been spotted at Diego Garcia during a routine satellite pass by a commercial imaging provider. The plane had been parked in a maintenance hangar normally reserved for US military aircraft. When I obtained higher resolution images through back-channel contacts, I could make out something that made my blood run cold. The aircraft's unique antenna array configuration matched MH370's specifications exactly. Someone had been planning this operation for weeks, possibly months. They had positioned assets, cleared flight corridors, and prepared facilities. All they needed was the right opportunity. A flight carrying passengers whose disappearance would serve multiple strategic objectives simultaneously. Flight MH370 had not been the victim of mechanical failure, pilot suicide, or hijacking by terrorists. It had been hijacked by the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus on Earth, using methods that most people couldn't imagine and wouldn't believe if they were told. But the operation hadn't ended with the aircraft's disappearance. In fact, that was only the beginning. In November 2015, 18 months after MH370's disappearance, I received an encrypted email from an address I didn't recognize. The message contained only a phone number and the words, Hangar 7, Test Flight 847. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes before I realized what I was looking at. Hangar 7 was a maintenance facility at Boeing's Everett plant, where experimental avionics systems were tested and installed. Test Flight 847 was a program I remembered from classified briefings in 2010. An attempt to develop optical camouflage systems for military aircraft. I called the number. Mr. Rhodes? The voice was nervous, middle-aged, with a slight southern accent. My name is Marcus Webb. I used to work for Boeing. I think we need to talk. We met 3 days later at a diner outside Everett, Washington. Marcus Webb was thin, pale, with the kind of perpetual exhaustion that comes from carrying secrets that are too heavy to sleep with. He had worked as an avionics technician for Boeing for 15 years, specializing in experimental radar and communication systems. In 2013, he had been assigned to a classified project that he knew only by its internal designation, Ghost Protocol. They told us we were developing stealth capabilities for the next generation of military transports, Webb explained, stirring sugar into coffee with hands that shook slightly. Optical masking at high altitudes. The idea was to make aircraft essentially invisible to both radar and visual observation by manipulating electromagnetic signatures in real time. The technology worked by using a network of sensors and transmitters built into the aircraft's skin. These components would detect incoming radar signals, analyze their characteristics, and broadcast counter-signals designed to cancel out the aircraft's radar signature. Simultaneously, optical sensors would analyze the visual background above and below the aircraft, then project those images onto panels covering the aircraft's exterior surfaces. We tested it twice, Webb continued. First test was a partial success. We achieved about 60% radar signature reduction and maybe 40% optical camouflage. But the second test... He paused, staring into his coffee. The second test, something went wrong. The aircraft just vanished. Completely. Our own radar couldn't track it. Visual observers lost sight of it. Even GPS seemed to fail. For about 8 minutes, we had no idea where a Boeing 777 was flying in controlled airspace. The test aircraft had eventually reappeared on radar, suffering from what the official report described as cascading avionics failures. The Ghost Protocol program was immediately suspended, its research classified above top secret, and its hardware locked away in storage facilities that Webb was not cleared to access. But Webb had kept copies of the technical specifications. I knew something was wrong when they made us sign new NDAs 6 months after the program ended, he said. Then, when MH370 disappeared, I started putting pieces together. The flight path, the radar gaps, the way it just vanished. It was exactly like our second test. Webb believed that Ghost Protocol technology had been secretly installed on MH370, either during routine maintenance or through a more covert operation. The aircraft's disappearance from radar wasn't due to the transponder being turned off. it was because the plane had been rendered electronically invisible. But why? I asked. If they wanted to steal the passengers and their research, why not just arrange for them to disappear after landing in Beijing? Why hijack an entire commercial flight? Webb's answer made me understand why he looked like he hadn't slept in months. Because this wasn't just about stealing research, he said. This was a field test. They wanted to see if they could make a commercial airliner completely disappear in controlled conditions, with the whole world watching. If Ghost Protocol could work on MH370, it could work on anything. Air Force One, enemy bombers, civilian aircraft carrying people they wanted to eliminate without leaving evidence. According to Webb, the aircraft had been remotely piloted using Boeing's uninterruptible autopilot system, a feature designed to prevent hijackings by allowing ground control to override cockpit commands. The system had been modified to accept commands from satellite links, making it possible to control the aircraft from thousands of miles away. They flew it to Diego Garcia, Webb said with absolute certainty, landed it, processed the passengers, then either destroyed the aircraft or flew it somewhere else for permanent storage. The debris that started washing up years later, that was planted, probably dropped from cargo aircraft or submarines to maintain the illusion that the plane crashed in the Indian Ocean. I asked Webb why he was telling me this. Why risk his life, his family's safety, his freedom to expose what amounted to an act of war against civilian aviation? Because they're not going to stop with MH370, he said. I've seen the production schedules for Ghost Protocol components. They're manufacturing this technology on a scale that suggests operational deployment. Commercial aircraft, military transports, maybe even spacecraft. They're planning to disappear things whenever it serves their purposes. Webb gave me a flash drive containing technical specifications for Ghost Protocol, maintenance records from the Boeing facility, where the technology had been developed, and satellite images showing aircraft matching MH370's configuration at Diego Garcia both before and after the disappearance. Then he made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would make sure this information reached people who could act on it. 2 weeks later, Marcus Webb died in what Everett police described as a single-vehicle automobile accident. His car had left the road during clear weather conditions, striking a tree at an angle that investigators found difficult to explain. The accident occurred on a stretch of highway that Webb had driven safely for 15 years, less than 2 miles from his home. I kept my promise. The first piece of alleged MH370 debris was discovered on July 29th, 2015, on Réunion Island, a French territory in the Western Indian Ocean, roughly 2,300 miles from the aircraft's presumed crash site. The fragment was identified as a flaperon, a movable control surface from the aircraft's wing. Malaysian authorities, French investigators, and Boeing representatives confirmed that the part had come from MH370. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. Oceanographic analysis suggested that debris from a crash in the southern Indian Ocean would take between 12 and 18 months to reach Réunion Island, carried by the South Indian Ocean Gyre current system. MH370 had disappeared 16 months earlier, exactly within the predicted time frame. The timing seemed to confirm the official crash location. What didn't make sense was the condition of the flaperon. Marine biology experts who examined the fragment found barnacle growth patterns that were inconsistent with continuous ocean exposure. The barnacles were too mature for the time supposedly spent in the water, but their distribution suggested periods of exposure to different water temperatures and salinity levels. Some marine growth appeared to have been scraped away, then regrown under different conditions. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a marine biologist at the University of Cape Town who was not part of the official investigation, published an independent analysis of photographs from the flaperon examination. Her conclusions were startling. The barnacle evidence suggested the debris had been exposed to multiple marine environments over different time periods, as if it had been moved between different oceanic regions before finally washing ashore on Réunion. The growth patterns we observed are consistent with the fragment being stored in controlled saltwater conditions, then introduced to open ocean currents much more recently than the official timeline suggests, Dr. Mitchell wrote in a peer-reviewed paper that was published. then mysteriously retracted 6 weeks later without explanation. But the flaperon was only the beginning. Between 2015 and 2018, more than 30 additional pieces of debris allegedly from MH370 were discovered along coastlines in Mozambique, Madagascar, South Africa and Tanzania. The fragments included wing flaps, interior panels, engine cowlings, and personal items belonging to passengers. Each discovery seemed to reinforce the narrative that MH370 had crashed in the southern Indian Ocean, its wreckage scattered by currents across thousands of miles of coastline. However, when I obtained copies of the detailed forensic reports on these fragments, reports that were not released to the public, I found patterns that suggested a very different explanation. Several fragments showed tool marks indicating they had been deliberately separated from larger structures, rather than torn away by impact forces. Cut marks were straight and clean, inconsistent with the ragged edges that would result from high-speed collision with ocean surface. Some fragments showed evidence of freshwater exposure, mineral deposits and corrosion patterns that could only result from prolonged contact with non-oceanic water sources. Most significantly, isotope analysis of barnacles found on multiple fragments revealed that they had been exposed to water with chemical signatures characteristic of lagoons and enclosed bays, not open ocean environments. The isotope ratios were consistent with water found around coral atolls, formations like those surrounding Diego Garcia. I began to map the discovery locations and timing of debris finds. What emerged was a pattern that followed shipping routes and naval exercise areas used by American and British forces operating in the Indian Ocean. Several fragments were discovered within days of documented US Navy operations in the same coastal regions. In October 2017, I obtained satellite imagery showing US Navy submarines surfacing in the international waters off Mozambique, approximately 48 hours before local fishermen discovered wing fragments on a nearby beach. Similar patterns emerged for discoveries in Madagascar and Tanzania. Naval activity followed by debris finds, with timing that suggested coordinated placement rather than natural drift patterns. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. A former US Navy diver contacted me through encrypted channels in early 2018, claiming he had participated in what his superiors described as deep water salvage training exercises in the Indian Ocean during 2016 and 2017. The exercises involved deploying aircraft debris from submarines at predetermined locations, then monitoring how currents and weather would affect the fragments' movement toward nearby coastlines. We were told it was environmental research, the diver explained during a conversation that I cannot record or document. Something about tracking ocean currents for climate change studies, but the debris we were dropping wasn't generic test materials, it was airplane parts, some of them with identification numbers that had been partially removed or altered. The diver provided GPS coordinates for several drop sites that corresponded exactly with locations where MH370 debris was later discovered. He also described seeing aircraft fragments stored in sealed containers aboard submarines, fragments that showed evidence of controlled saltwater exposure designed to simulate long-term ocean drift. They had marine biologists on the operation, he said, scientists who were cultivating specific types of barnacles and algae, then attaching them to the debris before we dropped it. Everything was designed to look like it had been drifting in the ocean for exactly the right amount of time. The debris discoveries that had seemed to confirm MH370's fate were, in fact, an elaborate deception, designed to maintain the illusion that the aircraft had crashed. Someone had been systematically planting evidence across thousands of miles of coastline, using military resources and scientific expertise to create a false narrative that would satisfy international investigators and grieving families. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. In March 2019, exactly 5 years after MH370's disappearance, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, printed on standard paper with no identifying marks or metadata. The image showed the interior of what appeared to be a military maintenance hangar, with concrete floors, overhead cranes and industrial lighting. In the centre of the frame, partially covered by camouflage netting, was the unmistakable silhouette of a Boeing 777. The aircraft's tail number was not visible, but I could make out distinctive features that matched MH370's configuration. The specific antenna array pattern, the unique winglet design, even scuff marks on the fuselage that corresponded to photographs I had seen of the original aircraft. But what made my hand shake as I examined the image was the background. The hangar's architectural features, the distinctive coral aggregate concrete, the industrial equipment visible in the frame. All of it matched technical specifications I had obtained for maintenance facilities at Diego Garcia. This photograph had been taken inside one of the most secure military installations on Earth, showing an aircraft that the world believed had been destroyed in the Indian Ocean. I spent weeks trying to authenticate the photograph, consulting with experts in digital forensics, aviation identification, and military architecture. Every analysis confirmed what I already knew in my heart. This was MH370, alive and intact, 5 years after its supposed destruction. The implications were staggering. If the aircraft had been preserved rather than destroyed, it meant the passengers might still be alive, held in facilities that existed outside any legal jurisdiction. It meant the debris discoveries were part of an ongoing deception designed to prevent search efforts from focusing on the aircraft's actual location. Most importantly, it meant the operation was still active. Ghost Protocol technology was not just a failed experiment, but a deployed capability being used for purposes I could only imagine. I began making copies of all my research, preparing to release everything through multiple channels simultaneously. I contacted journalists, former colleagues, and documentary filmmakers who might be able to reach audiences that government officials would prefer to keep uninformed. Then, on a Tuesday morning in April 2019, 2 men in dark suits knocked on my door. They identified themselves as FAA investigators, though they carried identification that I couldn't verify through any official channels. They confiscated my computer, my files, my backup drives, and every piece of physical evidence I had collected over 5 years of investigation. They explained that my research had been deemed potentially harmful to ongoing aviation security measures, and that my findings were being classified under provisions of the Patriot Act. I was ordered to cease all investigation activities related to MH370, to avoid contact with media organisations, and to report any attempts by foreign agents to recruit me for intelligence purposes. The men were polite but clear about the consequences of non-compliance, prosecution under the Espionage Act with penalties including life imprisonment. 3 days later, I found a small package in my mailbox. Inside was a single flash drive with a label written in block letters. 370 wasn't the first. The drive contained satellite images spanning the past decade, showing aircraft that had disappeared from civilian tracking systems in various regions around the world. Each image was time-stamped and tagged with coordinates that placed the aircraft at military facilities in remote locations, some in the Pacific, others in the Atlantic, several at installations I couldn't identify. But the most disturbing files on the drive were labelled with future dates, satellite images that appeared to show aircraft that hadn't disappeared yet, positioned at facilities that were still under construction. The operation that had claimed flight MH370 was not an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic program to disappear aircraft whenever strategic interest required it. Planes carrying inconvenient passengers, sensitive cargo, or simply flying routes that could serve as cover for military operations, all of them potential targets for Ghost Protocol deployment. As I write this, I don't know how long I have before the contents of that flash drive are discovered, or before my own disappearance becomes necessary to protect the secrets I've uncovered. But I know that the families of MH370's passengers deserve the truth, even if that truth is more terrible than the uncertainty they've endured for years. Flight MH370 didn't crash in the Indian Ocean. It was stolen by the most advanced intelligence apparatus in human history, using technology that makes aircraft vanish as completely as if they had never existed. The 239 people aboard that flight became the collateral damage in an operation designed to test capabilities that will be used again whenever the strategic calculus demands it. This silence corridor that swallowed MH370 is still active, still waiting for the next flight that carries passengers or cargo too valuable or too dangerous to reach its intended destination. In a world where aircraft can be made to disappear without leaving evidence, where debris can be manufactured and planted to support false narratives, where military technology can override the basic assumption that commercial aviation operates in civilian-controlled airspace, every flight is potentially vulnerable, every passenger is potentially expendable, the next time an aircraft vanishes without explanation, remember MH370. Remember that some disappearances are not accidents, but deliberate acts by organisations that operate beyond the reach of international law, public accountability or human conscience. And remember that in the silence corridor, the truth is whatever serves the interests of those who control the technology to make planes disappear. The sky is no longer safe. It never was. But now at least you know why.